It's what we had talked about earlier in terms of building a brand and identity outside of just your day-to-day work. You also really have to think about whether it's right for you. It's not right for everyone, and whether there are certain spaces and types of companies that you would bring a lot to. I think that's very important. Getting yourself out there too, right? It's that executive presence, that poise, that reaching out to others and networking. I think things that you typically don't always think about if you're in an operating role. And so I think if you're really serious about board service, you've got to think about all those things that I mentioned.
All right, welcome to this new episode of Hyphen Nation. I'm here with my friend Caroline Tsay. Thank you, Caroline, for being with me today.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
So Caroline is has an amazing story of a friend I met many years ago who was working in big corporate at HP and then started her own company. Alongside of that, she became a board director of multiple public companies. And I wanted to have this time for you guys to know Caroline, but also to hear about her story, because I hear of so many folks who are interested in or have heard of this mysterious board director, role, but don't know anything about that world or how to make it happen. Right now, women hold only 30 to 34% of public company board seats, depending on the index. But the pace of growth has slowed, as we know. And for the S&P 500, the share of women's directors have increased from 37 to 34%, 27 to 34% between 2020 and 24. Only 7.7% of public company board seats belong to women of color. So for Caroline to be on not one, not two, not three, but four public company boards, I just wanted to share her insights and ask her about, what it takes to get on these boards so that more Asian Americans and people of color can think about how the game is played and learn from her and her experience in doing so. Thank you, Caroline, for your time and your insights today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so Caroline, you started after Stanford. Can you tell us about your career and where you've been?
Yeah. Okay. So I grew up in Silicon Valley and I did my undergrad in computer science, but knew I didn't want to be a software engineer when I graduated. So that's why I did my co-term or my master's in
Hmm.
management science and engineering. And the first job out of college was at IBM Global Services, where I was able to leverage both kind of that business as well as the CS background. I worked with clients across so many different industries, different spaces and sizes. I found that role to be very fulfilling. It just was a lot of travel though. But, I had a friend
It's a
who grabbed,
consulting gig, right? It was like a
yeah, I
consulting
was
job.
consulting.
Yeah.
Yep. So consulting, but essentially building applications for
Hmm.
clients. So very much a technical and product bent to it. And I had a friend at Yahoo from grad school who said, Caroline, would you be interested in checking out Yahoo? I thought, well, so many of my friends are in the consumer internet space. I'm from Silicon Valley. Like, how could I not, right, check this out? And so I left IBM, as much as I love my time there, to go to Yahoo. And that is a whole story in itself.
As a fellow Yahoo, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff happened there. Yes.
So back at Yahoo, I was initially responsible for the search advertising space and products, and then transitioned into a role to run search products, e-commerce products, which included the shopping, homes, autos, and travel properties. Yahoo was going through so much change, though, over the 6 years I was there. I think we went through 7 CEOs, 2 of whom were interim CEOs during that period of
Oh
time.
yeah, that was during like Caroline, the Barts and Terry Semmel. Was he there when you were there?
Yeah,
Okay.
Semmel,
Yeah.
Hertz, Sang, Vincent, Thompson, uh,
Marissa.
Marissa.
Oh
I should
yeah.
one other I'm missing.
Yeah.
So a lot of change, which took a lot of resilience. But ultimately, I thought there was a lot of opportunity there with change. But after Yahoo, then went to HPE and ran the SaaS products organization as well as that business. I'm really thinking about how to focus and target the mid market as well as an SMB, not
Hmm.
just large enterprise deals that HPE was traditionally focused on, and then started my own venture capital backed company in the cloud optimization software space.
And so let's go back to when you were, I believe it was when you were a VP at HP, that you were thinking about joining a board. Like I remember when we talked about this and you told me kind of the backstory. Like this doesn't happen. Most people who are VPs do not like even think they are candidates for a public company board, much less a private company board, because they think, oh, you have to be a C-suite or CEO to even be considered. Didn't think that. Like, what were you like? How did you even think about this, or what got you thinking about board directorship?
Yeah, well, It started out with an executive coach that I had at HPE. And he said to me, Caroline, like, what really makes you passionate? What makes you happy about your career? And I thought back to my consulting days when I got to work with lots of different companies and different industries. And I thought, wow, like, wouldn't it be great if I could step beyond my day to day role at HPE and do things like advising companies?
Hmm.
And at that point, he brought up, like, have you ever thought about com- public company board service? I thought, wait, that's for like retired people or folks much later in their career.
Hmm.
And he said, that's something you can certainly consider. And I thought, okay, well, like, what does that mean? What do I have to do? And he said, well, think about your career as not just your day to day job. Think
Hmm.
about the subject matter expertise and the identity you have, what you can bring to the outside, right? So
Hmm.
think about it beyond the walls of the company that you're working at. And I thought, okay, great. If I can, somehow capture a lot of that experience and what I enjoyed back at IBM, then that's wonderful. So he told me then, well, you got to go network. And I thought, okay, wait, like what is networking? What does that mean? What does that actually mean?
Hmm.
It's very, execution oriented.
Yeah.
You said, well, you really have to get yourself out there, go speak on panels, speak at conferences, and of course, meet others outside of HPE, your former colleagues and others. So I actually took it as advice to heart, and I went to speak at a TechCrunch conference on a panel on marketing, data, and tech. It turned out that an executive was in the audience who saw me speak. He reached out after the event and said, Caroline, everything you talked about resonated with what we're trying to do, where we're trying to head as a company at Rosetta Stone, and your background and experiences seem to fit that. So would you be interested in meeting my CEO? Because we're looking for board members. And it just turned out to be somewhat serendipitous because the timing was such that I was just speaking with my executive coach
How
about,
long after?
I think it was about 6 months or so
Oh,
after.
wow.
So it was not what I expected from going to that conference and that event. And
Did
so,
you go? Did you go to this conference with that in mind? Like you started signing up for conferences because of what your coach told you?
yes, yep,
Oh, wow. With that intent, because prior to that, you weren't doing it.
no, not at all. I was just so focused on I've got to do a great job,
Internal.
my
Yeah.
role and organization and
Yeah.
team. Like, let me just focus on that. Like,
Yeah.
why do I need to go spend my time elsewhere?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I feel like a lot of Asians that I come across, they're very heads down in their job and their work, and they don't think outside of that. It's like extracurriculars, other than family and and
Yeah,
work. Those are the two worlds. But I'm like, there's so much beyond the walls of your office that you can do. But they are just so like, I wouldn't. Why would I want to go waste my time speaking on panels and traveling and go, speaking in front of people? Then I got to prepare and give talks and go in front of people and talk to people I don't want to talk to. I'm like, well, this is what could happen if you actually put yourself out there. But exactly what your coach told you is like you need to network and be out there because how is a board going to know who you are if you're just inside the walls of your if HP like they're never going to know who you are or what your skill set brings to the table.
exactly.
And so Rosetta Stone was your first board. Tell me about like that experience because I mean you talked to the CEO, it worked out. I mean, what was that experience like for your first company board?
Yeah.
Because prior to that, you said you had done advisory for startups or like what was your experience before that?
Yeah. So I had been advising an early stage venture capital backed company. And I was able to talk about that experience during the interviews with the Rosetta Stone board and CEO. But the board ultimately was looking for someone with both a consumer as well as an enterprise background,
Mm-hmm.
which is unusual because most people stay in one
One or
lane,
the other. Yep.
right? Even in Silicon Valley. And they were looking for someone who was really able to change the way the business model might be.
Mm-hmm.
So Rosetta Stone had gone through a lot of transitions from like DVDs, CDs, DVDs to SaaS and the cloud, but also very importantly, not selling just to consumers, but to enterprises as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were looking for someone of that background to come in, join the board, and bring those types of insights to the board. And I would say I did not know what I was, I wasn't expecting to find out that there were essentially activist shareholders that were
Mm.
ready to engage with the company at around the same time as joining the board. And I got a fire hose of experience from that. I mean, everything from CEO succession to board succession to changing the strategy of the company and direction to completely changing the organization to be able to serve that strategy. I mean, all these things we had to
Mm.
change just within the first 2 years of my experience at Rosetta Stone.
So it's almost like consulting, except that you actually get to execute the things that you're suggesting and talking about. Because it's not just, let me do an analysis on, like, your Bain consultant saying there's analysis on this company and I suggest you do this or recommend you do this, and they can just toss the whole binder in the garbage, or they can actually do it. But when you're on the board, you come into a company that's not yours and you look at the problems and you're like, okay, we need to fix and do this. But it was kind of like what you like doing at IBM Global Services, at a much, higher scale, but you got to think about other problems of another company and not your own.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point because I had to learn, I still continue to have to learn not to get into the operational, right? Because that's what the management team is there for.
Hmm.
It's a very fine line,
Yeah.
and I've crossed it before.
Hmm.
And had a CEO tell me, "Well, what do you expect me to do in this situation?" And so there's a very fine line. And I think thinking about the board experience, you have to really think about whether that is the right experience for you, because
Hmm.
you're not going in day to day doing the work and the
Sure.
management team at a very high level. I would say the topics that are very important to kind of any public company board is going to be CEO succession,
Hmm.
right? What happens if the CEO, something happened to the CEO, or the CEO had to step down, or some change needed to be made. The strategy of the company. So what is the long-term direction? What is the long-term value of the company that we're going to bring to shareholders? Along with that, capital allocation, right?
Hmm.
Where are we going to spend our cash?
Hmm.
Are we investing in it? Are we doing, uh, are we issuing debt? Are we hedging currencies? Like, what are we doing with
Hmm.
that money and our resources? And dealing with the risks of the company, right? So financial risk, reputational risk, security, privacy, data, technology risk,
Hmm.
everything purview traditionally of the audit committee. So I would say those 4 or 5 areas are what are top of mind and the most important topics for the board, in addition to talent, culture, many other
Yeah.
aspects. But yes, you're providing advice or feedback and asking questions without actually getting into the how.
Execution. Yeah. And so can you educate those who don't know, like, how many board seats generally are there on one of these boards, and how do they break up? Because I feel like most people are familiar with audit committee, but like, what are the general committees that people are broken up into?
Yeah, so it depends on the size of the company. So, micro cap, small, mid, large, mega cap public companies, but it can have anywhere from, say, 7 to 13 board members.
Hmm.
It's what I've seen. There are pros and cons to more and pros and cons to less, but generally the board is meeting 4 to 5 times a year in conjunction with earnings releases, and maybe there's like a fifth one for a dedicated strategy focused discussion. And then typically across the board, you've got 3 main committees. One is the nominating and a governance committee, which deals with CEO succession, CEO performance, succession of talent, kind of in other levels or under other levels, and director succession as well. I would say those are the main topics for the Nom-Gov committee. There's the audit committee, which deals with all of the risks that the company is monitoring and managing, and then talent and compensation. So dealing with the culture, compensation, bonus pools, and hiring. So those, I would say, are the 3 common committees.
Hmm.
And then you can have other ones too that are ad hoc or formal committees. I've seen companies that have a technology and innovation committee as an example, but those 3 are the main ones.
And so let's get through kind of some of the assumptions people have about board seats, and like, oh, you have to be a CEO of a public company to get on a board. You clearly were a VP at HP, and you were doing kind of enterprise and consumer marketing, and like you knew something that a lot of folks on the board probably didn't know. But what is it like? I mean, imagine they want to have a well-rounded board, so they look for people in different positions. But generally, what have you seen on the boards you sit in? Are they all CEOs of public companies? Like, are they all like, or for companies that, oh, we need a CTO for an innovation seat, or we need a like CMO for this seat. Like, how do they pick and choose who gets on a board?
Yeah. Well, so I was also CEO of my own venture capital backed
Hmm.
companies while we were early stage. That experience was relevant to some of the boards and
Later, yeah.
yeah, and talking to the boards and why they ended up picking me.
Hmm.
But I would say that it's an exercise the NomGov committee typically goes through. a year, 2, 3 years in advance, right? Looking at like what is again the long-term strategy of the
Mm,
company and what are the types of backgrounds and experiences or skill sets we want on the board to be able to help us through that.
hmm
So it can be as tactical as like let's look at the existing directors and see what types of skill sets they have, a Harvey ball exercise or a matrix type exercise, and then identify like here's what we potentially may need more of, or
hmm
here's a gap in what
hmm
we right. And then that's when you start mapping and figuring out what types of profiles and of course potential candidates might fit and be a good potential board member. You're also evaluating culture fit and all those things, but normally that comes down the interview process.
And realistically, how are people finding their board members? Is it like, oh, their fellow friends and golf club members and, people they go dinner with? Or is it most are found through a headhunting firm like a Spencer Stewart or Russell Reynolds or someone like that? Or is it, I mean, in your case, they found you at a panel. I imagine that's an outlier of finding a board director, but or is someone are they going on LinkedIn and looking for people to fill in the gaps that you just described? What is generally, as you've seen, like how do they fill in these roles?
Yeah, I think a couple years ago from some stat I saw in terms of board search recruiters, I mean, they filled less than 20-25% of public company
Mm,
board seats. And so, I would say the vast majority is looking at maybe the existing public company board network. If a board is particularly inclined to have someone who already has public company board experience, or they're looking at kind of a set, maybe similar sized companies or
mm,
companies that this board is aspiring to become or get to or scale to. So maybe they're looking at certain companies with different types of functions or profiles that are at that company to like even lists. So, the top 50, the top 30 of like whatever it is,
oh
right?
wow,
A lot of times boards will even look at those lists to
wow,
identify potential candidates. And then of course you've got, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, the Morgan Stanleys of the world, the Goldman Sachs, they've also got resources in terms of helping boards find potential candidates too. So it's good to be on their radars.
got it. And so let's go back to Rosetta Stone. You were there until 2018. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then July 2018, I think it was. But were there other boards that you joined in that time, or was it just one?
Yeah. So during my tenure on the Rosetta Stone board, I had also joined the Travel Zoo board, which
Hmm.
is a travel deals company similar to like a
I've
group.
booked some before. Yep, I remember them.
So I was on that board for about a year.
And why so short? Why weren't you happy at that board?
Yeah, no, it wasn't that I was necessarily not happy so much as the board and the company was founder controlled.
Mm,
And so, depending on the company, depending on the founders, right, there's certain dynamics of that.
yeah,
In some situations, I think, with the founders involved, they may either heavily kind of outweigh kind of all the opinions
yeah,
with the voice of the rest of the board,
yeah,
and the board can only contribute so much
yep,
versus other founders who are a lot more open
yeah,
to the independence of the board and getting insights and advice from the rest of the board.
yeah. So it wasn't the right fit, and so you could get on a board and realize this is not for me, and I'm not going to get much out of this, and neither of
Yeah,
you. So,
I think the most important thing I tell folks who are interested in board service is like think of being on a board as like a very long-term commitment.
mhm,
Right? So it might not be the same for private company boards, but I would say for a public company board, plan to be on the public company board for like 10 years or
mhm.
longer. Right. So really, is this something that you think you can be excited about, passionate about, interested in for a long time? That's the way that I would look at. Um,
Okay. And so, speaking of which, after Travel Zoo, your next board that you joined,
I joined the board of Morningstar in the
yep,
financial services space.
which you're still on the board of.
Yes, yes. So I serve on Nom and Gov as well as the audit committees for Morningstar.
Oh, so you can actually serve on two committees for a
Yeah,
board.
you can serve on many committees. It just is really dependent on your bandwidth.
Yeah.
And then there are certain rules and requirements, like for audit committees, no more than 3 audit
Yep.
committee of public companies.
Got it. But for Morningstar, it was also founder led as well.
Yeah, so our chairman of the board, Joe Mansueto, is still heavily involved as exec chairman of the board, and he was CEO up until about 7, 8 years ago. And, but Joe's incredibly open and we have a very independent board.
Got it. So, there are founder-led boards that are still more open to feedback from the board than others.
I think so. Yeah. From my experiences.
Got
Yes.
it. And then, okay, at this point, you're on Morningstar, and then you're on Morningstar and Rosetta Stone, and then this is, I guess around
17.
2017. And then what's the next board you join?
Yes. And then I joined the board of the Coca-Cola Company in 2018.
And how did that happen?
Yeah, the chairman of the board at the time had reached out to me and through my company. And so I
Oh,
thought a discussion about the company and what
yeah.
we bring to Coca-Cola. And as we ended up scheduling a meeting together, and then it was a conversation about joining the board of Coke. Truly an honor and exciting opportunity. And so anyway, I stepped on in 2018.
And you're wearing red today, and I don't know. But I mean,
It's
like,
influenced my color choice for sure.
yes, I'm sure. And look, it's great. Asian red, Chinese red. But I mean, you were working on your company as CEO, and this was very unexpected because you literally thought he was, I mean, I guess you're talking to the chairman of the board. That's a big deal. Like, do you usually talk to these folks for your company? I mean, this Coca-Cola, no less, is like one of the biggest, like 40th biggest company in
Yeah.
the world.
Well, we were very much targeting large enterprises
Yeah.
for my company in terms of potential customers and the solution that we could bring to them. So it wasn't too much of a, like reach to think that.
Yeah.
But, Muhtar Kent was, someone that I spoke to, who was chairman of the board and CEO at the time. He was the one that I had spoken to. Of course, I met with our current CEO and the rest of the board, our lead independent director, and the discussions continued from there. And I think ultimately I do have that entrepreneurial background and experience, digital native, have seen large and small situations, again, enterprise as well as consumer. And so I think a combination of all of that was the reason for joining the board.
So, what is the average age on these boards? Like, are you on the younger end on most of these boards, or?
I think I'm the youngest one on all of the boards
Yeah.
that I've been on.
And given that there's only like 8% of the company board seats are like minority women or women of color, you're probably the only woman of color on these boards as well.
Yeah, and I think the company had issued a release at the time and said I was the first Asian on the board of the Coca-Cola Company.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, one of the few, I would say, minorities.
And so when do you feel like when you're in those rooms, like you're heard, or is like how do you make your voice kind of more known in those rooms? Because a lot of folks have been on the board for a long time, so it's really hard to kind of like insert yourself into those conversations. It's like the new kid at school. It's like, who are you? How do you kind of throw your weight around, or make sure you're heard? Especially if you're going to spend your time doing this, flying out to Atlanta. I imagine you want to make sure that you're spending your time wisely and you're getting something out of it. But how do you kind of navigate that kind of environment?
I think you're bringing up something that's a really good, kind of an interesting thought because I've had to think about that as well, right?
Hmm.
Luckily, I've been in a situation with most of the boards where it's been close to 50% or over 50% women or female,
Wow.
which is unusual.
Yeah. Since we said 30%, only 30, like 27, 30%. Yeah.
But I've also been in situations where that transition was happening and I was one of the few tech,
Hmm.
focused board members or the only one. And I would say that certainly if you're the only one with a certain voice in the room, it is hard. I think in any situation,
Hmm.
right? To feel heard or to be heard or to feel like you're making an impact. So, I always appreciate the lead independent directors or the nom-gov committees, the CEOs that are looking to bring some type of critical mass in an area, right? So that you have several voices to weigh
Hmm.
in on kind of similar topics. I mean, you don't want to have complete overlaps, but some to a certain extent. I think that's one thing is how do you bring that diversity of thought and experiences, but
Hmm.
ensure that you're not bringing kind of single pointed experiences so that you're not heard in the boardroom.
Yeah.
And then the other is, I always have to keep in mind, right, what I bring to the table
Yeah.
and not focus on, oh, wait, I wasn't a public company CFO, right? So I
Yeah.
don't have that background and like I need to have that background. I think it's really about the experiences that you have
Yeah.
and
Lean into your strengths. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on your strengths and what you can bring.
I mean, I imagine as the younger, spokesperson in the room, and also, you bring a different perspective, even for the consumer. Like, I mean, they would want to pay attention to if you are, you are uniquely suited to answer these questions or talk about. But it sounds like they wouldn't have you on the board if they didn't value that. So I would imagine that most of these boards do value that. And so since then, since you joined Coca-Cola, I mean, what is the difference between like a Coca-Cola and a Rosetta Stone in terms of, one is huge and the other was, smaller? How do you compare the two experiences between the two?
Yeah, so vastly different sized companies for sure. I would say that it's almost like, the larger the company in some cases, assuming things are going well, right? Usually the management team has a very good
Under
handle
control. Yeah.
on what needs to be done with the
Hmm.
company. And the board is asking a lot of great probing questions, right, to uncover or to reaffirm, reassure, right, the direction
Yeah.
that the management team is taking. In smaller company situations, I would say they don't have the luxury of as many resources, I would say.
Yeah.
Right. And so in some cases, I talked about kind of that fine line between sitting on the board and not getting to the operational,
Yeah.
but in some cases, maybe some of the smaller companies might need a little bit more help along
Hmm.
those lines. So you might have a special committee set up, or you might be diving a little bit deeper when it comes to any business updates or reviews to
Hmm.
the board. And so those are that's kind of one main difference that I see. But for the most part, all of the topics, all of the committees that you have for public companies are the same or similar.
I mean, it makes sense. It's almost like a going in to help out with it, like a seed stage company versus like a late stage, like pre IPO company. Like, okay, one's a little more of a well-oiled machine that knows how to do things, and the other one is figuring stuff out. But it seems like there's more fires to put out when you're smaller or like kind of earlier in that. Mm. And did you find that most of these roles, these board seats, because let's move on to like you got on two more public company boards, SEMrush, marketing tools company, and Nice, which is a customer experience company. How did you find these other board roles? Did they come to you, or were you looking for more? Do you throw your hat in the ring for some of these? Like, what is the process of getting on these boards?
Yeah, one of these came about through a board search firm, which was
So it
unusual.
did happen, yeah.
It did happen. And then the other was through one of the firms I had mentioned through an introduction. They had my profile and the board was looking for someone of my profile, so they made
Hmm.
that connection. But I would say though, there are kind of lots of different avenues, but I think one of the most important things is like build your identity, right? Build your
Hmm.
brand outside of just the company that you're working for. What's most important is what can you actually bring to these boards? What experiences can you bring? And how are you articulating that story? So, something as tactical as having like a board biography, which
Hmm.
is very different from a resume, like a chronological list
Sure.
of things that you've done. But what is that articulation of what you can bring to the board in the form of a biography that you can send around or pass out to folks when you might be looking is really important.
So where does that board biography go? Do you like? I mean, it's not like that there's openings for a board seat. Like, how do you even get that out there?
Yeah, I think when you're reaching out to folks and expressing your intent or interest,
Yeah.
that's something that you should have and ready to hand over to them. Of course, every board search firm is probably going to be asking for one,
Hmm.
or any of the firms that are trying to match profiles and might reach out to you on that.
And so you bring up something I always talk about is like, how do you build your own brand or how do you market yourself? It's something that a lot of Asians aren't, particularly used to doing. It's like we said, keep your head down and you're working at your own job. You're not trying to promote yourself outside of that because one, we don't do that because it's, tacky. And then two, we're just not used to that. You're so heads down in the work we do that we're not thinking about outside of those boxes. How do you build your brand when it comes to board director service? Like, how do you put it out there? Is it just go to these big headhunting firms and say, "Hey, I want to be a board, director," and just like throw out your bio, or just like put it online, or do you put a big sign on LinkedIn saying, "I want a board seat"? Like, how would you build your brand if you're talking to someone who is a VP, even a C-suite level, person at an executive at a public company or a large private company like an Airbnb or something? How would you tell them to get their name out there or be considered?
Yeah, I think it requires a lot of introspection of what really interests you and what you're good at and have extensive experience in. I think you've
Hmm.
got to start there. versus I just want to be on a board for the sake of being on a board, right? Again, like what do you have to bring to boards or different types of companies?
Yeah.
And then also recognize that board service is not something that you're doing like the day-to-day job of. I mean, it is at a kind of different level. You have different responsibilities and a lot of different stakeholders. And so I think you really need to do an evaluation of that. And then once you've figured out, right, like what experiences can I bring to the table or to any company that I might serve on the board of? I've got the interest. I can see this as like a long-term proposition. Then it's like, how do I kind of get that down on paper and articulate it in a bio? How do I get myself out there in terms of those conferences or events or networking or those lists,
Hmm.
right? So think about like what you're really good at, what you're excited about. I think it starts there.
Got it. I mean, it makes sense. People, if they're looking for a board director, they want someone who like has a superpower and they're trying to fill in a gap with that superpower. It's like, how do you make your superpower known? How do you build that? And do you think it's possible to actually build a brand on, say, like a LinkedIn to get folks? I mean, before what used to be go to these conferences, network, speak on panels, become kind of the domain expert in a certain area, and people are like, this person will definitely be a good fit. But I feel like I see a lot of folks now become or show their expertise on LinkedIn, and even just in their posts. It's like they stand out because a lot of people listen to them about as an as an expert in a certain subject. Would you think that that actually is effective for trying to get a board seat?
That so if I think about that, we talked about earlier the average age or tenure, average age of a board.
Good question. Yeah, good
Really
point.
a little bit
They're not
old
on LinkedIn.
necessarily be on LinkedIn or even have
Fair
a LinkedIn
point.
profile. So I think it might help in terms of your operational role and your career or your kind of day-to-day job, but you might not as get as much kind of
Attend.
exposure for some of the things
Got
that
it. Got it. No, I mean, that's super helpful because I think a lot of people, they just speculate on where they might be able to get attention. And if you're putting your effort in the wrong places, it's not going to help. So they
right.
have to be very strategic about how they're spending their time getting on the radar of these boards. I mean, one of the things I always see is like assumption is you can't get on a board unless you're already on a board. I hear from people all the time. It's like, well, if you want to get started, start on a nonprofit board and then start on a private board. You just have to show you have some kind of governance experience if you want to be considered. Would you say that that's true from what you've seen, that everyone who's a board director has had to have prior board service, like whether it be a nonprofit or private or something, that they just have experience doing governance?
In my experience and from what I've seen, not so much.
Mm.
Because the company that is looking for a board member typically wants to find someone that has that kind of similar experience,
Hmm.
whether that's industry or size of company, right, or functions, and those skill sets they're looking for. And so a nonprofit works very differently from a public.
Totally.
Sure, you might be able to connect the dots on some of those experiences, but I personally just have not seen that from my fellow directors of that being necessarily the exact stepping stone.
Yeah.
Private to public, also, there are differences in
Hmm.
that
Totally.
as well, although if it's similar kind of area that they're looking for subject matter expertise in or some similar experiences in, right? And it's like a late stage and you're talking to a public company, there might be some relevance, but I think you have to think about like what are the experiences that you can speak to that actually bring relevance to the company that's looking for a board member.
And so, like, I mean, I'm curious, what is your favorite part about being on boards?
That's a great question. I think it's the combination of kind of deep and broad experiences across my career from consulting, right, working in supply chain and CRM, dealing with clients across semiconductors, to travel insurance, to CPG.
Hmm.
And then add to that the consumer background from Yahoo, as well as my experiences at HP,
Hmm.
and then starting my own company. I think the combination of those and what I find very fulfilling about board service is what I can bring to the table from
Hmm.
that deep and that broad experience set of experiences. So I think that's one thing that I very much enjoy about serving on boards.
And then have you found that the relationships you've made on the boards have been valuable to you in your career outside of the board itself? Because I would imagine, I always tell people, there is there's a lot of upside that you don't realize that is beyond the what you get paid for being like on a board, or even being a nonprofit board of trustees, school board of trustees or whatnot. But the relationships you build are invaluable. Can you share a bit about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I learned so much, right, from fellow board members. There's some incredible backgrounds and experiences. And so, I personally learn a lot from them. Um, and of course, I think there are, lots of different opportunities and things that you hear about, they may connect you to. So certainly that peer group is an important one, and that can be very helpful as well.
Can you share about an experience on a board? You don't have to share the board, but kind of like that was, it doesn't have to be a crazy experience, but like a very challenging experience that you learned a lot from, that kind of, it might have been putting out some whatever drama you can think of, but what was the most what's the best story you can think of your board service experience?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, every board is different. You've got different dynamics from
Yeah,
different
totally.
folks. And then, of course, it's also, chairman or
Yeah.
chairwoman, lead independent director who's involved, how they might like to run or lead things.
Yeah.
I would say one of the most challenging experiences, and I think this would apply to any other company, is a company that's going through a ton of change and it's not status quo. I
Hmm.
think that's when it's like there's a lot of the unpredictable, right?
Yeah.
What is one shareholder going to say? Like, what's the next one going to say and want to dictate,
Yeah.
right? How do you as a board figure out how you address that? Who speaks, right? And so I think there's an element of kind of like chaos when you've got shareholder activism, when a company is not maybe doing so well. You've got to think about CEO succession, like all of those things that if you don't plan for as a board or think ahead on, right, it can just quickly escalate. I think that's one of the most challenging situations to be in.
So, are there any specific examples of like a kind of a hair on fire type, board drama that you've been through?
Well, I'll just say I've received probably the longest email ever from a shareholder, and they were dictating like everything you could possibly imagine, down to your product should have this type of loyalty and rewards experience in it. And so,
I'm
yeah,
assuming someone with that much time does not have a large share, does not hold a large share of the company. I would imagine.
no, they were a significant
Oh,
shareholder.
it's activist shareholder, like a hedge fund or something. Okay.
How much time are you going to spend on addressing these things down to the
Wow.
level of detail or not? Right? It's a tough exercise to go through.
And you have to respond like you weren't. It wasn't just to you. I'm assuming it was just the whole board, right?
The whole board,
Okay.
it's the whole board, but as a board, you're trying to figure out, right, how do you prioritize across
Yeah.
a set of issues that might come.
I mean, were there any experiences of board succession that were not clean and easy, or like that you can recall were kind of more drama than you thought they would be?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely have gone through that, and I think you can see from recent public company kind of CEO successions that have been reported in the news, you just have to be a lot more buttoned down and prepared as a nom gov committee, as a board, in CEO succession.
Yeah.
That's what I would say on that.
And what's something that you were, I guess you were surprised to find, and you don't really love about being on boards that you didn't expect?
And sometimes you want as an operator to like go do something or tell the management team, like, this is how I would do it. Like,
Yeah.
do you want to go down that path? Are you following up on this? And one of the experiences I had was when once we're evaluating the talent reporting to the CEO, a specific function that we just think as a board, we just thought as a board wasn't doing so well, and that needed a change at the highest leadership level. And I remember calling up the CEO, and other board members were weighing in to the CEO as well, like, hey, you probably should think about whether we want to continue to keep this leader and make a change, and probably sooner rather than later. And I just remember being on the phone, and him coming back and saying, Caroline, what do you think that I would do if I had to let this person go now? Like, what could I do? Right? It's better than having no one. And so it kind of, took me back. I definitely realized, right, again, like I'm not in there to do
Yeah.
CEO and the management team.
Yeah.
Right.
He's like, I can't do this. So what am I gonna do? You're like, yeah, you have a point. No, so I guess, I mean, I to kind of wrap up a little bit, but I would love to hear your kind of top tips on someone who is in a younger version of Caroline Tsay or a VP at a big company? Like, how would they go about, you're the executive coach now, is like, what is your advice to folks out there, and even C-suite folks who don't, who haven't even thought about board service? What is the way to go about getting on a board? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, it's what we talked about earlier in terms of building a brand and identity outside of just your day-to-day work. You also really have to think about whether it's right for you. It's not right for everyone, and whether there are certain spaces and types of companies that you would bring a lot to. I think that's very important. Getting yourself out there too, right? It's that executive presence, that poise, that reaching out to others and networking. I think things that you typically don't always think about if you're in an operating role. And so I think if you're really serious about board service, you've got to think about all those things that I mentioned.
Yeah, so a lot of it is just getting yourself out there so that people can see you and kind of get some exposure out there to folks. Because if you, like you said, if your head's down, no one's going to see you and you won't be noticed for a promotion, much less a board seat on another company. But no, this is super helpful, Caroline. Thank you so much for your time. I think it's going to help a lot of folks who have maybe thought of it or have no idea even what board service means. But there's a reason why boards aren't more diverse, and why there's only 30% of boards are women. Is, I mean, a lot of people don't think they're suited for boards, or that they would be even considered. I mean, you are the reason why I wanted to have you on, is that you're proof that you can be considered no matter what level you might think you need to be. You can be considered if you're a woman. You can be considered if you're a person of color. You're proof, and or you can be considered even if you're young. It's not you don't have to be an old white male to be on a board. And in fact, it might help to not be, because then you can bring some diverse opinions and perspectives on kind of governance. So, but thank you so much for taking the time, Caroline. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dave, for having me. It's great to have this conversation with you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hyphen Nation. Please subscribe to my Substack at www.davelou.com and follow us on Instagram at the Hyphen Nation and LinkedIn at Hyphen Nation.